Oh, doing the same thing. I'm getting this like weird error. All right. We're live. What's up, y'all? Welcome to day 3 of building a content marketing strategy in public. Today, I think, is going to perhaps be the most exciting day so far. We've done a lot of work that has been fun and rewarding and valuable and super important, I should say, in sort of building the foundation in the past. But today, we're going to be digging into really the sort of the meat of the strategy, the actual strategy that we're, for the content that we want to create. Real quick, let me just post my announcements here in a couple places, and then we'll kick things off. If you're joining me live, go ahead and pop into the chat. Let me know who's joining us here. Got to post on the LinkedIn. Let me find my post here. All right. For some reason, LinkedIn does not like to translate my emojis from Slack. There's a challenge for my existence. We're going to get this posted really quick. Okay. All right. We're posted in Slack. We're posted on LinkedIn. Let me do a quick cross post over here. Cool. All right. Well, we are posted. Let us commence. Actually, let me just check something really quick here. Let me make sure that my post went live. Yeah, okay. My scheduled post went live also. Cool. All right. Well, we're all set. Let's get into it. Okay, so let me pull up my screen and we'll talk about what's on the agenda for today. All right. So here's our agenda. Let's just really quickly do a recap on what we have done so far, just in case you are joining us today for the first time. So 5 days of live streaming, 5 days of developing a content marketing strategy, essentially from scratch. We started this process with transcripts from about a few dozen interviews that we conducted with content and marketing leaders to give us some insight. We put those interviews essentially into 2 different categories or buckets, potential ICPs. On Monday, we reviewed those customer research interviews. We sort of drilled down into some of the key takeaways and insights. We focused on this specific framework that we use called roles, goals, and worries, really trying to understand the persona, their specific role within the organization, their goals, and their worries or their pain points. And from there, we can kind of extrapolate primary needs, pain points, jobs to be done, whatever sort of framework you maybe prefer. We can sort of pull out from that process. We completed the buyer journey worksheet using our template for the relevant ICP. We actually only did one of the ICPs because we were running short on time, but we did a review of all the interviews. And then we sort of held up the 2 different ICPs with a SWOT analysis of Optimist. So if you're not familiar with SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And from that, we selected a specific ICP that we wanted to focus on for building this strategy that we're working on today. The ICP that we chose essentially is a content leader in a mid-market business. So we didn't specify any specific industry. Mid-market in this context is a pretty broad category, but basically somewhere in the range of like 200 or 500 to approximately 1,000 or potentially up to 5,000 employees. So sort of a company that is beyond sort of early stage startup growth stage. There are sort of more at a more mature level rather than our previous persona, which was generally going to be a startup and working with sort of those early stage like Series A, Series B companies. Yesterday, we took another pass on the interviews. We went through our research framework focusing on channels, creators, and content. So essentially what we did was sort of an analysis of the landscape. So based on the transcripts and the interviews that we conducted, we looked at the specific channels that these folks mentioned that they use to learn about or follow along with things happening in content marketing and SEO. We looked at specific creators on those channels, again, in part from the based on the transcripts and the interviews and folks that were mentioned explicitly. We also did kind of some secondary research. So we looked through LinkedIn. We use LinkedIn and the algorithm in particular to sort of mine some data about people who fit into our ICP, looking through their engagement, their activity to identify additional creators. And then finally, we looked at the actual content. So we looked at the content that these creators are creating in order to help us get a sense of what is sort of their most successful content, what types of content get the most engagement and seem to be the most valuable for this audience. And finally, from that we sort of extracted some key insights about the content that seems to be most effective on these different channels, and also kind of how it maybe fits into the buyer's journey. So today, first of all, we'll go through these findings in a quick recap here in just a moment. But first, let me talk about what we're going to do today. So today, we're going to be going through our content strategy canvas. So we're actually going to be working on this for the next couple of days. So this is really sort of the culmination of all the stuff that we've been doing, where we're going to kind of pull everything together and actually map out like a coherent strategy for our business. And so all of the other stuff so far, I think, is sort of background. It's like research. It kind of feeds into this process and gives us some insight. But here's where we actually develop and say, okay, based on what we've learned, what are we actually going to do? And how do we sort of support that with evidence from our previous research? So what we're going to be doing today, a couple things. So first of all, in this content strategy canvas, there are sort of several dimensions that we'll be looking at. Number one, we will be looking at sort of the content strategy as it relates to the funnel or the buyer's journey, right? So you can see here across the bottom, there are tabs for each sort of stage or step in the buyer's journey: Affinity, Tofu, MOFU, Bofu, and retention. So we'll be thinking about sort of how our content strategy supports each of these stages in sort of the life cycle. The second thing that we're going to be looking at is the function that it supports. So, most teams, right? Our Optimist is maybe we're a little small, so we don't have sort of dedicated teams to this. But nevertheless, I think it's important to think about content marketing as it supports different functions. So, for instance, if we had a brand marketing team, how would our content marketing strategy work at sort of the Affinity stage? And if we had a brand marketing team, how would it work at the Tofu stage? So, really getting super granular about how content marketing supports each of these functions and also sort of maps out across the buyer's journey. So we're going to be, you can imagine this as sort of one giant matrix. We've broken it down into into individual pages instead of trying to put it all into one page. But essentially what we're going to be doing is sort of mapping all this out. Now, not every function is going to be relevant at every stage in the buyer's journey. So we'll sort of tackle that as we get to it. But that's what we're going to be doing today, is essentially filling out this sheet. Specifically, we're really focused on kind of three main fields in this sheet today. So we're going to be focused on the problem that we're trying to solve, the goal based on the function, and then the strategy. So I'll talk a little bit about what that is in just a second here. But tomorrow, we're going to be digging into sort of the execution side. So we'll be talking about specific channels, metrics, and tactics. But today, what we're trying to do is just sort of figure out, like, big picture, how does content work across these different channels and in support of these different functions. So let me flip back to my agenda here, and we'll talk through what we're going to cover. So we're going to go over the content strategy canvas. We kind of just did that. We're going to talk about what strategy really means and sort of the approach or the mindset that we're bringing into this as we are thinking about, what is a strategy? What does that actually mean? What does it look like? And how do we sort of form something that is a strategy? Uh, then we're going to dig into that box or the field that I mentioned before, which is the problem. So, what is the problem that we're solving at each stage of the funnel? Finally, we're going to be focusing on setting a goal for each function in each stage. And then we're going to be talking about defining that strategy. So, all that said, I think we're about ready to get started here. Let me just check in here on the chat under the function column. Thanks for hosting this workshop. Can you please zoom in a bit? The screen is quite blurry. Yeah, I can maybe zoom in. Let me try this. I guess let me know. Thanks. First of all, thanks for your feedback. Let me know if that makes it easier for you, or if you can see it more clearly. But yeah, thanks for the feedback there. And then yeah, to answer your question, what are your thoughts on adding product under the function column? Totally relevant. Thanks for bringing that up. I think the key thing here, right, is that when we think about content marketing, we generally don't want to think about it as sort of one big strategy, because for most companies, content marketing is sort of plays a supporting role for a bunch of different functions and goals. And so when we think about it as sort of one big strategy, the problem that we run into is that, you can't create content that does everything. It's just not feasible, and it's never going to be effective. So to answer your question directly, sure, absolutely, 100% add product here. For many teams, I'm sure product is also sort of um, a key team that is supported by content, and really should have a dedicated strategy for how content works for that function. So yes, thanks for bringing that up. Definitely think that's worthwhile. Okay, glad to hear the resolution thing is working out there. Thanks for the feedback. Let me know if we do run into any problems here as we get started. Real quick before we dive into, just do a quick recap on the past findings, so that we can kind of refresh our memory on what we found before. So first of all, let me start by walking through quickly our buyer persona. I mentioned this at the top. Basically, the person who we're trying to reach here, our sort of primary audience with this strategy, is ideally a mid-market content leader. There are ideally, have a role of something like head of content, or a content director, or perhaps a content marketing manager. Obviously, it could also be, a senior variation therein. And the other key component here is that they generally work at like a mid-sized company, which we've loosely categorized as 500 to 5,000 employees. The exact number of employees is not as relevant. Really, the defining factor here, I think, is that they have sort of an established and more mature marketing and content function within their team, right? So they have content marketing as, again, kind of a supporting function for all of these other specific goals and teams. We really dug pretty deep, I would say, into some of these like roles, the goals, and the worries of these folks, and this stuff will definitely come back around as we start thinking about specific tactics. But for now, I think a couple key insights that we'll want to keep in mind as we're working through today's worksheet is that this person generally is going to play like kind of an air traffic controller role. So a lot of times they're sort of taking content requests and sort of goals and campaigns and strategies that are happening within other teams. PR, brand, growth, SEO teams are sort of feeding their content needs into this person, and they sort of play this air traffic controller role. One of the big challenges with that is that they often sort of get relegated, I would say, to like this support function, or like a service org, where they're kind of expected to sort of just like take orders from other team members, but they're not really given a seat at the table at sort of the strategy level. And so because of that, it really hinders it means that they don't have time to think strategically, or do sort of cross-functional planning, or integrating the content strategy at a high level. And B, I think it hinders the content quality, because there is not always a lot of thoughtful planning put into the content requests, right? So we heard stories in the interviews of folks saying, hey, I got a request from the brand team and they want a bunch of blog posts, but those blog posts don't really make sense based on their goals or what they're actually trying to achieve. So I think a big part of our goal, a big part of how we support these folks, and we need to sort of bake this into our content strategy is, how do we help them sort of elevate their function to a more strategic seat within the overall marketing and growth teams. So I think that's a big part of what we want to focus on as we're thinking about some of these high level problems and strategies that we're trying to solve here. Uh, the next thing I want to talk about really quick is the channel research template. So this was our process yesterday. We're not going to get super in the weeds on this today because we're going to be talking about channels and specific tactics tomorrow. But it's worth noting, that we did sort of figure out a general framework for kind of how this works. One of the key takeaways here, I think, was that LinkedIn is really primarily about sort of like this like emotional resonance content. So I would say this is really going to come in handy as we think about like that affinity, that really like early stage building that audience of people who just sort of resonate with your general thinking and messaging. YouTube and podcasts, which we kind of grouped together because most of the podcasts and YouTube channels that we researched yesterday were essentially cross posts or repurposing of the same content. We found that these were sort of probably one step deeper in the journey. So they weren't super tactical per se. They weren't like really in the weeds about how to do something or what it looks like on sort of a tactical level. But they did tend to focus a lot. Let me flip back here really quick. Focus on sort of big picture outcomes, strategies, overall frameworks for achieving specific outcomes. So again, as we think about our content strategy, that's helpful for us in thinking about how these channels are going to map to different parts of the buyer journey. And then finally, we spent some time digging into newsletters, which were another common channel that a lot of people mentioned. We dug into a bunch of different newsletters that were named specifically by our ICP. And what we found was this is the level where it sort of starts to get more tactical, right? So people start to, a lot of the most popular content in these newsletters really sort of bridge the gap between like the strategy or the framework or the big picture of, how do I approach this problem or achieve this outcome? And they started to get more tactical and say, okay, here are the 5 things you need to do. And then here's at least a little bit of information about how to do each of those things. So I think, again, if we think about the buyer's journey at a high level, the way that I'm thinking about it right now, we'll get into this more tomorrow again, but useful to think about it today. LinkedIn is really sort of the top of the funnel. So sort of building that audience, building that brand, building affinity for us as a business. YouTube podcasts feel more like a top of the funnel play. So really thinking about, how do we help people understand their problems at a high level and sort of get a general sense of like how they should approach that particular challenge. And then newsletter is where we're going to get sort of one level more tactical and say, okay, if you're thinking about this problem, here are some specifics about what solving it might actually look like in practice. So those are sort of my main takeaways from the last 2 days. If you have questions on those, feel free to pop into the chat. Let me know. I know some folks are probably joining us for the first time who weren't here for the last 2 live streams. Speaking of, if you want to go back, you can watch the recording. Just hit the Optimist YouTube channel. Go back. You can watch the recordings at your leisure. While you're over there, hit the subscribe button. Would love to have you subscribe. We've got 2 more days of live streams after today as well. So lots more work to do, lots more process to go through together. And I'm excited to go through it. All right, let me take a drink here, and then we will dive into the content strategy canvas. Okay, so a couple things I want to mention here. We've already kind of gone through the basic structure of this canvas, but by the way, as I have done the last 2 days, I'll post a recap message on LinkedIn after this live stream. If you want a copy of this template for yourself, all you got to do is drop a comment. So look for that post and you can grab your own template here. Okay, so first of all, a couple blanket disclaimers, which is that there are a million different frameworks and approaches and thinking, lots of different thinking about how we should think about content marketing. This is my preferred framework. A couple of things, for instance, like the different stages in the buyer's journey or the funnel, as it were. Not saying that this is the only way that you can do it, but this is the way that we think about it. Similarly, thinking about sort of the different functions here, there are a couple, sort of specific decisions that we've made. One being, for instance, like SEO is really a channel, right? So SEO can be a channel within many of these functions, but SEO is also often a function. So that's why we listed it here as a function. So just to sort of preface any questions about that, I'm not saying this is the only way to think about content marketing, but this is sort of our chosen framework. Secondly, let's talk about what strategy is. I've mentioned this a couple of times already this week, but I think it's worth repeating. I think that many people get confused by the idea of a strategy, right? So it's like, what does a strategy actually mean? What does it consist of? What does it look like? I think the two most common things that I see are folks who think a strategy is, essentially just a list of tactics, right? And so what I mean by that is, maybe it's like a content calendar or whatever. That is their strategy. Is like, hey, we are, we're going to go out, we're going to do keyword research, and then we're going to create a bunch of content, and this is our strategy. It's a content calendar with a bunch of topics in it. Now that calendar, that plan has potentially, a strategy kind of baked into it, right? You've sort of chosen a strategy by default in order to pursue that particular approach. But the topics, the tactics themselves are not necessarily a strategy, right? So the other thing that I see a lot of times with strategy, so one is, you've just got a bunch of tactics and you're sort of calling it a strategy. The other thing is that people think of strategy as sort of all the foundational research. So all the stuff we just did yesterday, right? Here's our ICP, here's our buyer persona, here's the channels that they hang out on, here's the kind of content they like. All of that sort of foundational information and research. Again, I would say that is an input to a strategy. So we've got the input of the strategy, and we've talked about the output of the strategy, which are the tactics. So what is the actual strategy is up? What's the piece in the middle? Really, it's super simple, right? So the way that I think about it comes from the book the book Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. It's sort of like the ultimate guide, I would say, to like strategic business thinking. But essentially, he boils down a strategy into just three main things. Number one is it's a diagnosis of a problem. So before you can set a strategy, you have to figure out like, what are we actually trying to solve here? So, you might think that that's obvious, or you might think that that's the goal, for instance, but those things are not always the same. The problem that you're trying to solve is very dependent upon the research. So it's dependent upon those inputs that we've talked about. So for instance, if let's say your goal is to increase brand awareness, the problem that you're trying to solve could be a number of things, right? It could be, hey, people don't like us and we want to improve the sentiment about our brand. Or it could be, hey, people have never heard of us, and so we want to increase our visibility, right? There are a bunch of different problems that you can solve that lead to the same outcome. So the first step in thinking strategically and having a strategy is figuring out, what is the actual problem I'm trying to solve here? And so that's what we're going to focus on first today. We're going to think about the problem as it relates to the different stages of the funnel. And we'll get into that in just a moment. The second component of a strategy is the guiding principle. So this is what we're going to actually put here in this strategy field. Now, the guiding principle is not super specific. It's not, hey, we're going to post 10 blog posts a week or whatever. It's a simple statement about what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it, right? So it's sort of the answer to the problem, right? So if the problem is we need to increase our brand awareness by improving visibility, then the strategy is, we're going to, use the LinkedIn algorithm to expose our brand to a broader bubble of people or something, right? So it's sort of a single cohesive idea about how we're going to approach that problem. And then the final thing, the final component of a strategy are coherent tactics, right? So that's sort of this whole part of the sheet where we'll get into specifics. So the idea here is that we should start by understanding the problem. We should figure out at a high level what is our approach to solving that problem? What is our chosen path to success? And then from there, we can figure out a whole bunch of different tactics and sort of executional details that align with those two things. So the key thing here is that these tactics should come from the strategy, right? So if I start with tactics, then I could just brainstorm a bunch, a million ideas about here's what the content should look like. We should write a post about this. We should I should be using LinkedIn carousels or whatever. But if it doesn't have any sort of strategy as sort of a central tenet, then there's no way to know, like, is this actually helping us achieve our goals? Does it align with all the other stuff that we're doing, and is it working together? I think that's the other key thing here. So unfortunately, I think a lot of content teams get stuck here because they sort of enter into the process at the tactical level, where they say, hey, we've got a goal. Now let's just like brainstorm a bunch of ideas, or the CEO comes up with a bunch of content ideas or whatever it is, and they never really have sort of this central gravity that's helping them guide those tactics and decide what fits, what doesn't, what aligns, what is a distraction, those types of things. Manifests in a couple different ways. One, the content strategy is inherently chaotic, right? So if it feels like your content strategy, you're just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, and you're not really sure what the heck you're doing, or how any of this stuff is supposed to work together, or drive an actual outcome. That's a pretty good sign that you again haven't really articulated a clear strategy or that guiding principle. The other thing is that you have no way, you have a gut feeling when something doesn't really fit, but you don't really have a way to articulate and say, hey, actually, CEO, that sounds like a great idea, but I don't think we should pursue that, and here's why. Right. So the one of the main challenges, and sort of the main paradoxes of working in content is that you're constantly trying to come up with ideas, and you're sort of the creative driver a lot of times of content, but you also have to be able to say no to a lot of people and be able to say, here's why we're not going to do that. And I think again, having this guiding principle, having this sort of overarching umbrella statement of strategy is super helpful. All right. All that said, thanks for allowing me to go on my tangent here. But let's start talking about the problem, the first step in the process for today. So as I said, the problem is really about understanding the customer and the research, and then trying to think about, okay, what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve here that is going to help us achieve our specific goals. And so a couple quick notes, or one quick note there, which is that really this problem could be a lot more granular, right? So for instance, the problem that you're trying to solve could be specific to the function, right? So you could have one problem related to brand, one problem related to demand gen. You could even have, problems related to specific channels, right? So you could get much more granular here. A strategy, one strategy, most content marketing strategies are actually a bunch of different strategies, right? And they're supposed to work together, but you don't necessarily have to come up with like one overarching strategy that's going to work for everything. And in fact, you probably can't. So I wouldn't recommend that you try to do that. For our case, I am going to sort of define one kind of overarching problem per stage. So per stage in the funnel, we want to think about what are we really trying to solve here from a business perspective. um, Again, we could get more granular, but we're not going to do that today. So let's talk about the problem at the affinity stage. Okay, so if we think about the problem that we're trying to solve here, first of all, just to frame this, when I think about affinity, I think about basically brand awareness, but sort of one level deeper. What we're trying to do here is really just sort of build an audience of people who like us as a business. So the problem that we're ultimately trying to solve here, I think, it comes down to there's two dimensions to that, right? So one is exposure. So we need to get in front of more people, right? In order to expand our kind of pool of influence, our pool of affinity, we need to first of all be exposed. We need to get in front of more people who kind of fit into our ICP. The second thing is that we need to we need the content that we're actually creating to like resonate with them, right? So it has to be something that actually increases all, not just their awareness of us, but also the fact that they like us. We want them to like us more based on this content, essentially. So I think the problem that we're trying to solve here is sort of the combination of those two factors, which I suppose kind of boils down to hmm, sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. As you can see, I didn't, I haven't like scripted this. I don't have a specific problem statement in mind, so I'm trying to kind of think through it in real time here. Um, I think the problem that we're trying to solve here is to like sort of advance our specific like brand of thinking about content marketing. I don't think that's quite how I want to frame it, but the idea being that we don't want exposure, right? So I don't just want people to like follow me on LinkedIn just to follow me on LinkedIn. What I want is for people to like follow me on LinkedIn because they agree with the way that we think about and approach content marketing. Uh, so I would say the problem here is to sort. Why is my? I think it's to like advance a specific or if we want to frame that more as like a problem, right? So this is I would say this is almost sort of again this is where like the problem and the goal can be a little bit fuzzy. They are obviously related. Um, I think we want to sort of like overcome outdated ideas about content marketing to attract audiences looking for newer, better better models. There's a lot to unpack there, but I think the overarching theme here is that what we're trying to do is basically I don't want to get too far ahead into the tactics there, but I think if I sort of give a quick preview of my thinking on that problem statement, overcoming outdated ideas means that we're sort of poking at pain points that people have, right? So, hey, you have this pain point, and the reason why you have that pain point is because you have sort of this outdated model of how content marketing should work. And then I can say, okay, now here's a new way of thinking about it. So as I think about that, I think that's a pretty good problem statement. I think we might refine that a little further as we get into it, but for now, let's move forward with that line of logic. Um, let's go here to exploration. So first of all, just to preview here, we're going to do the problem statements first, and then we'll kind of get into each stage individually. So the next thing that we're trying to do is tofu. So first of all, probably worthwhile kind of defining what tofu is. Again, in my mind, it's like exploration. So what that means is basically, somebody is sort of now they're sort of aware of like a pain point maybe that they're experiencing, and they're starting to think about like, is there a way to solve this, or how can I make my life better or easier, or how can I make this process go more quickly, or increase our output or whatever, right? So they haven't really like landed on any kind of solution or anything. They're just like, they know that there's something they're trying to do, but they don't, or an outcome they want to achieve, but they don't really know either much about it or really even have a sense of like how they might go about solving that problem. They just know that like, I'm not really happy about how this particular thing is working. Um, and so I think the problem that we're trying to solve here, if we kind of continue that logic, right? So the first step, this affinity, the thing that we're trying to do, right, is overcome these outdated ideas. I think here the problem that we're trying to solve. Actually, let me skip forward one step because my mind is immediately going to what I would consider to be a middle of the funnel problem, which I think is big. The middle of the funnel problem. So once they've figured out the challenge, right? So hey, I've got a problem. We're not able to produce content at the quality or the pace that we need to. That's my problem. Now I'm in the middle of the funnel. The middle of the funnel, again, my definition is consideration. So now I'm looking around, I'm saying like, okay, how can I actually fix this thing? And what does it look like? And what are my options? The key problem here, and we heard this, sort of time and time again, is internal friction, right? So getting buy-in for additional content marketing budget or getting sort of a seat at the strategy table, right? So I can't fix the problem with the low quality content until I get, the seat at the table to be able to sort of think about content strategically with a cross-functional team. And so I think the problem that we're trying to solve here is eliminating internal friction. I think I want to reframe this slightly because again, I want to think about it from the perspective of like the problem that we're trying to solve for us and not necessarily for the persona directly. But from the persona side, I think what we're trying to do is help them eliminate internal friction and barriers. And so if we think about that, really, if we think about that, actually, our problem that we're trying to solve is that when somebody gets to this stage in the funnel, they think, "Hey, that sounds like a great solution, but I'll never be able to make it work." Right? So I think that the problem that we're trying to solve here from our perspective is actually that we want to convince people, convince our buyers there is a clear and achievable path to overcoming yeah. So we want to convince our buyers that there is a clear and achievable path to overcoming internal politics, friction, and other barriers. Okay, so I know we kind of skipped a step here, but the point is like once they get to this stage, they might say like, "Oh, hey, it'd be awesome if I could hire Optimist. They would definitely be able to help solve my problems, but it's never going to happen because all of the internal politics or our process is too messy, or I can't get the budget or whatever, right?" So we need to present and convince this like path for this persona just to show them like, hey, there is a way to achieve this, and here's what it actually looks like, and here's how to get there. Um, let's go back to Tofu really quick and kind of noodle on this one a little bit more. So let me think out loud here a little bit. So once again, we're starting with trying to overcome these outdated ideas, advance sort of these new updated models for how to think about content marketing. Now somebody is sort of looking for they have a specific problem. So I think the problem here is that we want to help. This is a little bit meta because we're sort of in the process right now of like diagnosing a problem, but I think the takeaway here is that we want to diagnose common content marketing problems as symptoms of outdated models and thinking. Okay, so this as I'm thinking about that, it has a little bit of overlap here, right? So we're trying to overcome outdated ideas. So we might want to actually broaden this up so that we're not these two stages of the funnel are a little bit more distinct. But I think the thinking is a little bit similar, right? The key thing here is that we're trying to help people identify with specific problems that they're experiencing and then connect those problems to uh, outdated models, thinking or strategies for content marketing. Oh, I guess I'm saying content marketing too many times there. So, yeah. So the idea here, right, is that yeah, the problem that we're trying to solve is people don't always understand that the problems that they are experiencing are because of these outdated models, thinking, or strategies. So we're not really trying to diagnose them necessarily. We're trying to help or I don't know, push or encourage. Uh, let's just say people get marketers to diagnose common content marketing problems as symptoms of outdated models, thinking, strategies. I think that's what we're trying to get to here. A couple key thoughts on that. One is, again, I'm trying to frame it as a problem that we're trying to overcome, right? So the problem that we're overcoming is people have not connected those dots, right? And so we have to do is sort of tip that domino and say, hey, look, you're experiencing this. Here's why, right? We don't have to tell them exactly how to solve it. We just have to say, here's why you're experiencing that, and what that problem really looks like, and sort of zoom in on that particular pain point. The other thing I want to mention here, uh, which, by the way, the specific language that we use in this problem statement, it might seem like I'm maybe being like super pedantic, but the language is super important because, for instance, like one of the things I want to articulate here is that we're trying to get marketers to understand that. And when I say marketers, I mean sort of the broadest category. The reason why I'm saying that is because, yes, our ICP is a content leader, right? So they're director of content, head of content. But as we've already talked about, they work within generally a cross functional team, meaning that they're not the only people who see or experience these pain points. So if I'm the head of demand gen and I'm working with a content leader and the content that I'm getting back just like isn't up to snuff, or it's slow, or the time, we always miss the deadlines, or whatever that pain point might be, I see that as well. And I am potentially a driver to say, hey, like we need to rethink our approach to content marketing. We need to rethink, sort of how we're executing on this content. And so I think when we think about top of the funnel, yes, our primary ICP is the content person, the head of content, but they're sort of tentacles. They're because they are working with a cross functional team, and sort of this like service org model. Their pain sort of reverberates to other people in the organization, marketers in general. So yeah, that's one thing I want to focus on there. Let's talk next about Bofu. So I think this one is a little bit more straightforward, right? So we want to convince buyers here that there's sort of a clear path forward, uh, and that there are sort of ways for handling these internal politics, friction, and other barriers. Uh, I think that the problem here is that so at the bottom of the funnel they're sort of making a buying decision, if you will. So I think that the problem ultimately is about choosing Optimist, let's say, versus a range of other options. Okay, and so I think the key thing here is really there are sort of two brands of competitors for the most part. I guess technically three, right? So one is I'm going to hire a team of freelancers and do it myself. Two, I'm going to build an in-house team and do it myself. And then three is I'm going to hire an agency. And so obviously all the other agencies that you could choose besides Optimist, I think are potential, their potential competitors. So what our job is here at this stage, the problem that we need to solve for, at a high level, is we need to basically sell Optimist versus these competitors. So if I'm going to frame that again as sort of a problem, I'm going to probably change one of these two languages because I don't like repeating it. But I think basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to convince buyers that the unique Optimist model is the best way to handle content marketing and overcome existing problems, bottlenecks, etc. Right. So here's where we're sort of advocating for Optimist uh, explicitly, but sort of subtext of that is that the reason why Optimist is the best, right, is because of our sort of unique approach to content marketing. Our thinking, yes, but also our model as a business. So if you don't know much about Optimist, right, we have kind of this unique, like, kind of hybrid agency collective model. You can call, a lot of people call it a bunch of different things, but we sort of have like a network of professional freelancers, and then we build, sort of like an agency team for each client. And so again, it's sort of a hybrid between working with freelancers and working with an agency. The idea being, it's the best of both worlds, none of the drawbacks of either. That's sort of part of our messaging and our positioning. So at this stage, I think that is ultimately what we want to achieve, right? We want to convince buyers, someone who's at this sort of decision point. They're looking around and saying, okay, look, we need to figure out a different way to scale our content. We can, you know, hire freelancers, we can build in-house, or we can hire an agency. Which path should we choose? And then B, if we do choose sort of an agency path, uh, ooh, okay, hang on. Sorry, I just I had an insight. Optimist is not competing with these other options. Optimist is a fourth path. I think that's the problem that we're trying to solve. I think that's what we're trying to do. So we're trying to establish Optimist as a fourth path to handling content marketing and overcoming existing problems and bottlenecks, etc. Right. So yeah, so it's sort of like we're kind of, it's a little bit of like a category creation kind of thing that we're trying to do here, right? So we're basically trying to say, like, the problem that we're trying to solve is like most people think about those three things and they say, working with an agency is fine, but it's super expensive, or I have to work with an account manager who doesn't know what the hell they're doing, or working with freelancers is awesome, but it takes so much time and it's so much effort to find and manage all of these writers, yada yada yada. And what we want to instead say is like, hey, no, 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 like there's actually this fourth path, which is like in the middle, and it sort of marries these two things together and kind of gives you the best of both worlds. So I think that's the problem. The problem that we're trying to solve here is that in most people's mind, this is binary, and so we need to introduce or establish this like sort of new path. Again, you can kind of think about it as like similar to like a category creation kind of play that you might see in software. Okay. Um, let's jump over here. Let's talk about retention. So obviously, you can think about retention as a bunch of different things. For us at Optimist, it's primarily just keeping clients on, but it could also be expansion or selling new seats or whatever. So depending on what your business is, this could be retention or life cycle or whatever kind of makes the most sense for your type of business if you're using this canvas. Um, so yeah, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? It's interesting because now we got to take off our like marketing hat a little bit, or our sort of traditional marketing hat. We're not trying to get people in the door. We're trying to sort of keep them at the party, as it were. So yeah, what are we trying to do here? So if we think about and keeping in mind, that we're not thinking about like sort of business tactics or operations at this stage. We're thinking specifically about content marketing. So how can content support agency client retention? Hmm. Hmm, hmm, hmm. The first thing that comes to mind is that one of the things that I've noticed that a lot of our clients tend to appreciate is that they feel confident about the fact that we are sort of on the cutting edge in some ways. I wouldn't say we're the most bleeding edge agency in the universe, but we generally are staying up to date on all the crazy things that are happening, all the new tools and ways of measuring and that kind of thing. And so my first thought, and this doesn't necessarily have to be the thought, but my first thought is the problem that we're trying to solve here, basically that we want our clients to feel confident that we are sort of looking ahead, right? That we're always looking ahead, that we're always like steps ahead of them for sure, but also other agencies. So, that might manifest as, talking about all the new tools that we're using or, how we're experimenting with new strategies or whatever it is, right? So sort of a forward thinking kind of approach. So that might be one thing that we want to focus on here. Is that the problem? Like, right. So the problem really comes down to why do people leave an agency, right? Why do people leave our agency in particular? And then how do we stop them from doing that? Um, I mean, I think at a fundamental level, there's usually a few levers that lead to a client leaving. Of course, there's sort of the service piece of it. So, if for some reason we don't deliver, or we don't meet their expectations or whatever, obviously that's a big part of it. The other thing is budget, which is sometimes sort of a function of our service, sort of a function of like what we are able to provide at what price point. But a lot of times it's also like a matter of like internal politics and like discussion, right? So is the is the investment paying off, and how well can you sell that to your boss or your CEO or whoever you have to report that to? I think that's an interesting one because I think that's a challenge that almost every marketer faces. It's something that we talked a lot about in our ICP and kind of our customer research stage. Was a lot of folks felt like they either didn't have sort of the data or the ammunition or a framework or an approach to sort of presenting wins back to the C suite or whatever. So I think the problem that we're trying to solve here is related to helping our contacts, our stakeholders, the people that we're working most directly with, which again, most likely is a content head of content, etc., helping them be kind of internal champions for the work that we're doing, right? So creating some kind of content. Again, this could be like content that we create explicitly for them, or it could be content that we're creating in general that they can sort of share. Maybe it's something that we publish on our blog that they share with their boss or whatever, right? It can take a lot of different forms. Again, we're not getting into tactics quite yet, but the idea being that we're sort of helping them sell that. So that's the outcome that we want. So how do we frame that as a problem? The problem that we're trying to solve is at a fundamental level is that they don't have that data or that ammunition or a framework or a process for sort of selling that internally. We're not really trying to convince them or sell them on that. We're trying to In a way, we're sort of trying to help them like level up, right? So we're trying to motivate, maybe motivate. That's a good one, right? We're trying to motivate them to proactively sell the value of our work internally. Now, again, the way that we approach that, there are myriad tactics and like executional specifics that we can get into, but at a high level, I think if this is sort of the problem that we're trying to solve, then yeah, then we can think about how do we achieve that? What is the sort of the guiding principle of the strategy? Clear and achievable path. Okay, so I want to come back here to Affinity because as we talked about before, I think right now we've got too much overlap between Tofu and Affinity. So just to recap where we landed on these, here we talked about overcoming outdated ideas about content marketing to attract business audiences looking for newer, better models. And here we talked about get marketers to diagnose common content strategy problems or common content marketing problems as symptoms of outdated models thinking strategies. So I think this one is correct because this, aligns with the stage of the funnel, which is tofu, which is where I'm sort of exploring my pain points. I'm trying to figure out like, man, we never hit our deadlines. Why? And how do I fix it? Right. So I think that aligns here. When we think about affinity, I think we zoomed in a little too far here by thinking about overcoming outdated ideas. That's more tofu. I think what we want to think about here is how do we just get people to like us, right? Basically, right? So, and usually, by liking us, they sort of resonate with our message. And so, what is the barrier to? We talked about this before. It's about exposure, and then it's about sort of the resonance of the content that we create. That sort of increases the affinity for our brand. And so I think we can break that down in that's basically two different problems, right? So the first problem is getting our content in front of more people. That's one problem that we could solve here. The other problem is making people react more strongly to our content. So which do I think is sort of our primary barrier at sort of this affinity stage? It's probably the former, right? It's probably an exposure problem, right? That's sort of the primary problem that we're facing. When I post stuff or I write about content marketing on LinkedIn, I generally get a good response. But my sphere of influence is this big, and the market is this big, right? And so how do we expand the bubble? Um, so I think that's a good way to think about it, right? Is like expanding the bubble. So the problem that we're trying to solve is a lot of that's dictated by the algorithm. So overcoming sort of those algorithmic barriers, I think, to sort of get our content exposed to a broader audience or a broader segment of our audience. That's probably the best way to think about it. Let me just document that. Okay, so that's the problem that I want to solve. Okay, so as I said, there's some sort of common characteristics here as we think about the problem, the goal, the strategy. I think about these as sort of like three legs of a triangle, right? They all kind of go together. You can't really have one without the other. And sometimes they sort of overlap. We don't want them to be identical. We don't want to say, hey, here's our problem and our strategy is exactly the same, right? Our strategy needs to be sort of the link between the problem and the goal. So the way that I like to approach this is I start by sort of framing the problem, saying, hey, what's the primary thing that we're just like is in the way of what we're trying to do here? And then say, okay, from a goal perspective, like what does success look like? And then I can say, okay, how do I kind of bridge those two things with some kind of a cohesive strategy or a single statement about our guiding principle, as the book says. Okay, so now we're going to get into the weeds here. So we're going to get the first thing that we need to do is sort of figure out like which of these functions is actually relevant here. So for affinity, I would say, first of all, lead gen is kind of off the table, right? This is not really a function of lead gen. Lead gen folks, or if I had a lead gen team or I had a lead gen person who was just focused on generating leads, they're probably not thinking about affinity as part of their their marketing efforts. So I can probably, I'm just gonna like X these out. SEO could be, but not really, generally not really, right? So SEO for most businesses, right, kind of kicks in the Tofu stage, right? I mean, I could create a bunch of content that's just sort of super generic about content marketing topics, and try to build our affinity that way. In my experience, that's not particularly effective. And what you end up with is like a ton of traffic and not much to show for it. So I really don't think SEO is sort of a relevant function for our business here. Again, could be in other contexts. Some folks, sort of start the SEO journey, if you will, uh, at sort of that like pre-funnel or affinity stage where they're just, hey, we're just trying to get eyeballs on our website. We want people to know who we are and hopefully like us, even if they're not in the market or they're not ever gonna buy our thing anytime soon. Same thing, life cycle as a function here. I'm really thinking about primarily as like retention, or once people have gotten in, how do we get sort of retention and referrals, that kind of thing. So again, I would say that's not super relevant for affinity. Maybe, actually, hold on, let me rethink that. Might be relevant for affinity, because part of retention is continuing that relationship with our existing clients, right? So getting people who are already paying us money to like us even more, hopefully, right? So that they stick around. So I'm actually going to keep life cycle in here because I think it is relevant and actually kind of an interesting way to think about it. So let's bump those up. So we're going to kind of X out these. So that gives us these three functions that we're thinking about as kind of the primary focus for growing affinity. Our problem is that we need to get our content in front of a broader segment of our audience. We need to expand the bubble of influence, not influence, and we need to overcome algorithmic barriers. Okay, so let's talk about our goal. So the goal, I think, at this stage, the kind of goal that I want to set is we have a pretty good idea, like it's sort of semi-quantitative, right? It doesn't, we don't need a smart goal where we're saying, hey, we're going to increase our brand exposure by 12% in the next 3 months or whatever. But I do think we want to get that sort of specific, in that like our goal is to achieve some type of semi-specific outcome. So for instance, brand function, I should note, we're not thinking metrics quite yet, because that's down here. It's going to be sort of channel specific, right? So we want to think about sort of the umbrella effect that we're trying to achieve, which is, from a brand perspective, I think it's increase social following for both brand accounts and personal accounts of leadership. Let me change my word wrap settings here and my alignment and whatnot. Yeah, so I think that's kind of like our North Star goal here, right? From a brand perspective, like we're just trying to get like more people to like us enough that they follow us. I think that's right. Yeah. So that could include, a range of tactics that are like sort of just designed for like growing our audience, right? It doesn't even necessarily have to translate into any sort of further down funnel uh, activity or metrics. Like if we're just thinking about it from sort of a pure brand perspective, like all I'm trying to do is get in front of more people and have them sort of have like a generally, like a generally good impression of us. Demand gen. Demand gen, I think, is like, I would say the way that I think about demand gen, which has some overlap with brand in my experience, and sort of the general like awareness goal. I think it is that we don't want people to just be like aware that we exist or like know our brand, but also have like some sort of specific association with it, ideally, and sort of like what we do and what kind of problems we solve, right? So as they progress through the funnel, hopefully, when if they come to the realization that like, hey, I have this specific problem. Oh, hey, I know about Optimist, and I know that Optimist solves that specific problem. So that's the way that I think about the kind of difference, I guess, between sort of pure brand and like the awareness stage of demand gen. Um, and so if I think about the goal there, I think the goal is to basically it's to like I think it's related to like the consumption of content, right? So if you think about how do I get someone to have an association with Optimist and to sort of be aware, not just be aware of our brand and like know our name and our logo, but actually know like what do we actually do and like how like when might this business at someday be relevant to me? I think the way that generally occurs is that you get people to your website in some form, right? So you basically increase traffic to your website because I think most if I see some interesting business on LinkedIn, they share content. That's great. I like what they're doing there. That's cool content. I still might not know anything about them or what they do. Right. I might just know like, oh, I know about this business and I know that they share good content and I follow them on LinkedIn because I like the content, but I don't really know what they do as a business. Usually the way that I do that, I figure that out at some point. If I want to figure it out, is that I go to their website, right? I go to their homepage, I read their messaging, I say, "Oh, okay, so they do this. I get it now." Like, that might come in handy someday if I'm thinking about whatever this thing that I'm trying to achieve later on in my life. Um, the other way that I might do it is, I might just like look at their LinkedIn page. That might tell me enough, but chances are, my personal habits are if I'm interested in learning more about a business, and I come across them, let's say on LinkedIn or wherever, I might first click on the thing to go to their LinkedIn page. I might click the link to go to their LinkedIn page, but I'm almost certainly then going to click on the link to go to their website. So I think that the sort of primary goal here is to increase and again, this is super broad because we haven't figured out channels yet. So I'm not saying like, people have to click from LinkedIn, come to our website necessarily. All I'm saying is that the overall sort of umbrella goal is to increase visits to our homepage from sources. That's it. Increase visits to our homepage, right? I think that's sort of how we are building affinity. Again, this isn't all of demand gen; it's just the affinity stage. We're just getting people to know us and to know a little bit about what we do. That's all we're trying to do here. So I think that the primary goal is to just get people onto the homepage. And then when we think about channels, we can think about specific metrics that we might measure there, like maybe it's clicks from LinkedIn to our homepage, for example. Let's talk about life cycle. So as we discussed previously, I think the way that I'm thinking about this is that, we want to continue to build affinity and we want to continue to have people like us even after they've given us money. Right. Well, obviously one big way that we do that is just through like delivering good work and being a good partner and all that stuff. But from this perspective, we want to think about it as sort of a function of marketing, of content marketing in particular. So what is our goal there? And sort of how do we, kind of put that into like something that's like sort of semi quantifiable. The obvious one is like retention or like increase the length of our engagements or the customer lifetime value, something like that. Could certainly be a goal. Another one that's maybe like a little softer and a little but interesting is that like I always love it when our clients consume our content. So, for instance, I host live workshops and Q&As and stuff, and I would say, I don't know, 30, 40, 50% of the time, somewhere in there, one of our existing clients will like sign up or like attend those events, which I think is sort of a great signal that they trust us, right? And they see us as sort of an authority that they're continuing to learn from even after they are working directly with us. And they could come to me directly and just talk to me about these topics, but instead they're sort of continuing to consume the content that we create because they find it valuable. Uh, B, I think it sort of demonstrates our own ability to like create and execute content. C, I think it also demonstrates sort of the effectiveness of the content in sort of a subconscious way, in that the people who, you know, if you're already a client and I'm creating content that is so good that you want to consume it, then like that sort of signals to that person that like, hey, like they've really figured out their audience, right? Like they know how to get people like me to come and read or watch their content, right? And so I really like that as sort of a goal because again, I think it just sort of and every it's just an additional touch point with the client where we're sort of continuously building that trust and that the strength of that relationship where they feel like they can trust us and they know that they sort of get the latest of our thinking without uh you know without us having to like tell it to them directly, right? So they're sort of consuming it via our content. So I'm gonna use that as our goal. I think that's a good goal. And again, it sort of translates into a bunch of different channels. We can think about that in terms of like actual metrics, whether it's podcast listens or workshop signups or whatever. But the idea being life cycle focus is yeah, I think that's a good goal. Okay. So now we are on to strategy. By the way, if you've got any thoughts on this, we'd love your feedback. Feel free to pop into the chat. Let me know how you're thinking about where we're at so far. And apologies, by the way, I'm not actively looking at. I've only got my one screen going, so I'm not actively looking at the chat. So I'm trying to check in every once in a while. Oh, I see. Sorry, so Shannon had some thoughts and input. Thanks, Shannon, and happy to get thoughts from anyone else who's joining us. So Shannon was saying, so you want to be thought leaders in the content marketing space, for lack of a better word. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good. I'll say this really quick. I don't think that's wrong by any means. I try to avoid the term thought leadership or thought leader because I feel like it's so generic. A and B, I feel like it's sort of been bastardized to mean like anything that's not explicitly tied to SEO, like therefore is thought leadership, which is like I don't really agree with that dichotomy. But more importantly, I think it's helpful at this stage to get super specific. So when you use language like that, right? You say my goal is to become a thought leader in this space or whatever. That's not really actionable, right? Like it doesn't really tell you what that means. Like how does that, what does that actually mean functionally or in practice or in real life? Um, and so, yeah, you might have noticed as I'm working through this, that's one of the things I'm trying to be here is like super precise with the language, in part because it kind of helps give some dimension to what we're trying to accomplish, even if it's just a sentence about that that particular thing. But the other thing is that it also gives us some clarity on what it actually means. So when we use sort of like jargon, like thought, like I want to be a thought leader, that doesn't really tell me what the outcome should be. Like that's just such a nebulous term that's very difficult to quantify or measure or assess in any way. So anyway, that's my little rant there. But Shannon, thanks for chiming in with that question. Um, she also had another question. Do you believe that algorithmic barriers are the only external barriers to brand exposure? Uh, Great question. Certainly no. I mean, absolutely not. I mean, I think there are lots of barriers to brand exposure. I think for our purposes, and I'm doing a little bit of sort of forethought here. I'm sort of jumping ahead and kind of cheating a little bit, but knowing the channels that we're focused on are primarily LinkedIn, podcasts, YouTube, newsletters. Those channels, if our goal is to increase brand affinity, presumably via those channels, then one of the major challenges there is sort of mastering the algorithm, right? Those channels, multiple of those channels, not email, obviously. Well, we can talk a little about that separately, but LinkedIn, YouTube, podcast to some extent. The better that you sort of play the algorithm game, the more potential exposure you can unlock. And I would say at a much higher scale, the algorithm opens up opportunity at a much larger scale than you can open up through sort of sheer marketing effort, if you will, right? So I can make the best content in the universe and put it out there, and I can spend all my time manually promoting that, and that would pale in comparison to something getting picked up by like a Spotify curated playlist or something, right? Like that, the power of the algorithm is sort of exponential exposure. And so no, I don't think the algorithm is the only barrier, but I think if you can crack the algorithm, then some of those other barriers become sort of moot. That's my personal take. Um, the other interesting part of it is obviously we haven't gotten to this level yet, so we're not quite talking about this stage of the process, but if we also think about the other sort of non-algorithmic channels, so something like a newsletter or email, generally the main driver of subscriptions to that newsletter tends to be algorithmic, right? So for instance, people follow us on LinkedIn, then they see our content, then they like subscribe to our newsletter or whatever, right? So it all sort of trickles down, for lack of a better term, uh from that sort of cracking that algorithm code in my opinion. So I think that's sort of why I'm putting that somewhat front and center, but it's also part of the reason why I didn't state that as sort of the explicit and only problem that we need to solve, because no, it's not only about the algorithm for sure. So thanks for chiming in there, Shannon. All right, let me take a quick drink here and then we'll get back into it. So next up, we're going to dive into strategy. As we talked about already, this is going to be, it's really about crafting like a specific statement of strategy. The way that I like to think about it, again, based on the book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, it's a guiding principle. So it's just sort of saying like, how do we do this at a high level? Right? We're gonna focus on getting every rebound, or we're gonna focus on hitting single base hits, right? Or are we swinging for home runs, right? Like those are strategies. Like if you think about sports, I think sports is a great analogy for thinking about strategy, which is that yes, you've got your individual tactics like running bases and catching fly balls or whatever, but you've also got a game strategy, which is are we hitting for singles, or are we swinging for home runs? Are we playing screen, or are we playing or I'm sorry, zone, or are we playing man, right? Like Those are sort of big picture strategies that then have sort of tactics which play out on the field or in the actual game. So let me grab a drink and we'll talk about strategy some more. All right. Okay, so if our overarching goal today for brand is to increase our social following for both brand accounts and personal accounts of the leadership, I'm gonna put team here. Hmm. Just had a thought, which is that this is actually ignoring one of the strengths of Optimist. So if we focus, if you think about this as like a like the sort of a fulcrum, right? So like if we focus on leveraging, sorry, AI haters, I'm not an AI. I just used the word leverage. If we focus on increasing the social following primarily through brand accounts and the personal accounts of the leadership team, we're ignoring one of the primary strengths of Optimus, which is that we actually have like this huge network of freelancers who work with us, already know us, like us, and sort of provide a level of like social social capital, social proof to a certain extent. So should we be actually thinking about this in aggregate, right? Like how do we tap into that network to sort of further amplify the exposure for the Optimist brand, right? So rather than just thinking about, a couple key accounts, my LinkedIn account and our brand account or whatever, thinking more broadly about, I think that's a good change to our goal here because I think that actually is going to further serve some of our down funnel goals as well. To think about kind of the collective reach, increase collective social reach for brand accounts and personal accounts of Optimist team. Yeah, I like that better. I like that better because we're thinking more broadly. And again, we have sort of this like superpower that we can tap into, which is that like, hey, we've actually got this network of like hundreds of creatives and folks who many of them aren't super active on social, so they don't have like a huge personal brand, but they're even if they have a small audience, they're part of this bigger collective audience that we're sort of building together. So I like that. I like that. And I think that leads us to this idea of the strategy, right? Which is like, what is the strategy that we're gonna approach here, right? So again, we're not thinking about tactics at this level. So we're not thinking about, oh, hey, we're gonna post memes or like, whatever. We're gonna write long form posts on LinkedIn. Like that's a tactic. We want to think about the overarching strategy. How do we get our content in front of a broader segment of our audience, expand the bubble of influence, and overcome algorithmic barriers in order to increase our collective social reach for brand accounts and personal accounts of the entire Optimist team and network? I think we do that through some kind of like collaborative content. Right? There's a couple ways that we could approach this. One is, hey, we're gonna write, I don't know, we're gonna write LinkedIn posts for everybody, and like, have this like massive coordinated effort to get every single person on our team and in our broader network, posting in sort of the same the same direction, rowing this social boat together. That's certainly one way we could do it. We're asking for a lot of free work. I think in that case, from folks, we're asking people to sort of do a thing proactively. It's gonna come across generally as contrived, especially if these people are not particularly active on LinkedIn. They probably don't want to like be constantly posting, a message about how great Optimist is or whatever. Um, it's going to be very inauthentic, I think, if we do it that way. So how do we do it in a more like organic and like authentic way? And I think the way that we need to think about that is how do we sort of inspire action from the broader collective rather than uh yeah. And that's really the only level that we need to get to today, by the way, is the strategy. So I think we just need to figure out like what's the fulcrum of this approach? Like how do we actually get this thing off the ground? And we don't have to think about at this stage, we don't have to think about like exactly what that's going to look like in practice until we get to the tactics tomorrow. So I think the strategy here is to inspire collective participation from broader create and share content that inspires collective participation from the entire Optimist network. Might come back to that. Might iterate on that a little bit, but I think that's sort of the heart of what I'm thinking here is that you know we sort of unlock the reach, the sort of collective reach by creating or sharing some kind of a content asset or something. I don't know if it's like tagging people or doing something that sort of inspires them to like participate or take action. So again, rather than like compelling them and saying like, hey, we're gonna write a LinkedIn post for you and you have to post it, we're focused on we want people to sort of voluntarily participate in this strategy because whatever content we're creating is sort of valuable or helpful or useful for them, and that inspires them to also share. I think that's a good one. Okay. Create and share content that inspires collective participation from the entire Optimist. Okay, so next thing we're trying to do is we want to increase our visits to our homepage. Again, the problem that we're trying to solve is to get our in front of a broader audience. So, you know, that's also helpful to think about, right? That we're trying to get in front of a broader audience. So, when we think about visits to our homepage, we're not necessarily trying to get the same people to visit our homepage more frequently. We're trying to get new people to visit our homepage. So how do we ultimately do that? What's our strategy? Well, while I'm noodling on this, uh, a couple things, right? So you may recognize here that we're developing each of these as sort of a standalone strategy that then ladders up to the overarching problem that we're trying to solve, right? So again, I've mentioned this previously, but I'll sort of reiterate and mention it again. I think a lot of people think of like, oh, okay, I'm going to create a content marketing strategy, and that's just going to be like one big universal plan for how to do content marketing. That's not the way that I think about content marketing strategy at all. I think about it as if I have a specific goal or a specific thing that I'm trying to do, I need a strategy for that goal. And if I've got a different goal, then I need a different strategy for that goal. Now, sometimes they cross pollinate, right? Sometimes they support each other. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes you can use the same content for both purposes. But I think the key to a really effective content marketing strategy is actually breaking that down into several strategies. You can think about it sort of like I don't know, like an assembly line or like a factory, right? You've got one machine over here that's running and doing this thing. You've got one machine over here that's running and doing this thing. And you got one machine over here that's running and doing this other thing. and then they all make a different part, and then you put them together to make your car, right? Like that's kind of the way that I think about content marketing strategies. It's not one, you don't have one big machine that just makes cars, right? You have a bunch of small machines that work together and that are planned strategically as individual steps in a bigger project, a bigger vision, right? And that's kind of how I approach it as well. All right, so our strategy for demand gen to increase visits to our homepage. So we think about the process of getting someone again from one of these, sort of affinity channels, which we haven't explicitly defined, but we can already think, it's likely going to be predominantly LinkedIn, if not a combination of like LinkedIn and maybe like YouTube or a podcast of some sort. Um, if the primary goal is to get people from that platform to our homepage, there needs to be we need to either just like purely increase the eyeballs on, so if you come across a post on LinkedIn and we're trying to get you to come to our homepage, there's two basic paths, right? So one is there's a link to our homepage in the post itself, right? So for some reason we say, hey, go visit our homepage, check it out. The other thing that it could be is that we are or the other path is that somebody sees a post, they click on, let's say, my name, they go to my profile, they see that I run Optimist, they click on the Optimist link, and then they go to, they click on they click on the link from the Optimist business page to go to our homepage. Those are sort of the two paths. So what would a strategy be to increase either of those paths? So again, one strategy or one approach that we could take, at least, is that we would just link directly to our homepage in many of our posts. Feels pretty unnatural to me. But there is a strategy that we could create around that, right? So if that's going to be the approach, that's how we're going to try to solve this problem, right? Then our strategy might be, for instance, hey, let's put some kind of like content that we want people to consume on our homepage. So they have to go to the homepage to read it, right? That could be one approach. The other approach that we could take is like, hey, we're going to link to blog posts on our website, and we're going to sort of try to like passively increase traffic to our homepage with the assumption that, hey, if you come to our website, you read one of our blog posts, then maybe you'll click to the homepage and learn a little bit more about us. That's another thing. If we wanted to approach the other path and we wanted people to come to my profile, let's say, again, just an example, but really we're thinking about all of our collective profiles, and we want people to click onto our profile. We want them to see that link and then click into our homepage. I think it comes down to I think the strategy there. I think what compels people to do that is that the content that's being shared is specifically about Optimist as like a company, right? So it's some kind of like story or anecdote or something where hey, I'm writing an article, I'm working with a client and we're focused on this, and here's how we approached it. So it's sort of like a not really a case study. It's more of like I guess like building in public, right? That's really what it is, right? It's sort of building in public content of some sort, or sort of transparent content of some sort that we're sharing that says, here's what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. which I think is going to first of all, it's going to help people understand like what we do and that we exist and that we're a business. And then B, I think it's also likely to compel people to then go say, oh, we're interesting. He's talking about uh, Optimist. He's talking about this business Optimist. I wonder what they do, or I wonder what who they work with, that kind of thing. And so then they might take those extra steps to go find Optimist. It also opens up a very natural sort of way to work Optimist directly into the content of a post, let's say, or the content of itself. So, if we wanted to, for instance, link directly to the Optimist website or to the Optimist company page, that would make sense if we were creating content about Optimist. So I think that's what it is, right? I think it's like transparent building in public content. Oh, hey, we're getting kind of meta here. I did not plan that, I promise. Although obviously I had an inkling that building in public would be a way to attract potential clients. Obviously that is probably obvious, but anyway, let's talk about this. I think I got this wrong, actually. I think I got this backwards. So getting our existing clients to voluntarily consume our marketing content, I think, is our strategy. It's not really a goal. I think that's more of our strategy, right? So if we're trying to get in front of a broader, expand our bubble influence, overcome algorithmic barriers, existing clients to voluntarily consume our marketing content. I mean, yeah, we could measure this in a lot of ways, but I think this is closer, at least, to a strategy, right? It's not really a strategy. It's really, yeah, it's kind of in between, I guess. It's an outcome. So I think what we need to figure out is then how do we make that into sort of a semi-quantitative goal, which is, probably overthinking it, but it's probably just something like have more clients share, client engagement, sharing, signups, etc. with content. It's kind of just like a bucket, right? This is just kind of like a bucket of metrics, really, but I think it's fine to like set as a goal. It's like, hey, we just want to like juice these numbers. We could probably, we probably come up with a better like umbrella term for this, like client improve client engagement metrics or something, like content engagement metrics or something. But yeah, basically it's just kind of a bucket for how we will eventually translate that into specific metrics that we could measure. So then the question becomes, how do we articulate that as a strategy? So we already know that the way that we're trying to do that is by getting our clients to voluntarily consume our marketing content. So the strategy for how we do that is there are a couple different approaches that we could take, right? One is like we could potentially like send it. Actually, I think this is good. I think this is still a good strategy because if we get more specific than that, I think we're getting into tactics, right? So like just let's do a little preview here, cheating a little bit, skipping ahead. One of the tactics might be, right, send new and upcoming content to existing clients each month in a newsletter, right? That could be an example of a tactic that we would use, right? So rather than trying to define that as part of our strategy, let's just say our strategy is to get those clients to consume this content, and the goal that we're trying to achieve is like we're trying to get them to engage with that content because it's going to help us solve this problem of sort of building our sphere of influence, or sort of strengthening. I would say in this case, we're sort of strengthening our sphere of influence with existing contacts. So I think we leave it as that. I think we leave that strategy there. Get our existing clients to voluntarily consume our marketing content. That's the strategy for increasing that affinity with existing clients as a goal. Okay. We are through the first sheet here. Now we've got to get into Tofu, MOFU, Bofu, and retention. So it's only taken us an hour and a half to get this far. So obviously we're going to have to probably pick up the pace here for the next portion. I may have to take some of this offline as well today, but we'll definitely continue to work through this. I am going to pause for just a moment, take a quick break, hit the restroom, grab a drink, etc. If you have questions, if you're on the stream and have questions for any of the work about any of the work that we've done so far, pop them in the chat. If you want me to dive into or touch on any topic in particular, we can do that. But for now, I'll BRB in 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, we are back. Thanks for bearing with me. Had to get some caffeine here, my Diet Coke for the day. All right, real quick, before we get back into it, if you haven't already, come join Tofu. 100% free community. We've got almost 4,000 members now. SEO, content marketing folks in there. It's a great mix of freelancers, solopreneurs, agency owners, in-house marketers. And so there's just like a really great like dialogue that happens in there, questions, people getting feedback and advice on their strategy, specific tactics, how to pitch clients, all kinds of awesome conversations and content being shared in there, as well as work opportunities, and we host regular live streams, Q&As, workshops, that kind of stuff for Tofu members. So again, it's 100% free to join. So Slack community, 4,000 members almost. So just pop over to jointofu.co. We would love to have you. Secondly, if you're finding this valuable and you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Really appreciate that. It's great to see those numbers increase. And as I just mentioned, first of all, we've obviously I'm doing the live streams all week this week, so subscribing is going to help keep you up to date on those upcoming streams tomorrow and Friday. But beyond that, we also host live workshops and Q&As, generally once a month, at least, sometimes as many as 2 or 3 a month. And so, subscribing on YouTube is a great way to kind of just stay up to date on all the stuff we've got. We actually have a live workshop or a live Q&A actually on Thursday. Our guest is Eddie Schlainer, the guy from Very Good Copy. He has built an amazing brand for himself and an amazing business, writing, copywriting for companies like Ramp and Gong and just a lot of really like big, well-known brands. And so we're going to be talking about social copywriting and his sort of tips and strategies and secrets for effective social content, building your audience on platforms like LinkedIn, etc. So yeah, would love to have you join us for that one. Again, hit the subscribe button. That's going to keep you up to date on all of our content. Pop over to Tofu, join tofu.co. That's going to also keep you up to date via the Slack where we, of course, we're announcing any upcoming events, that kind of thing. So yeah, would love to have you join us for those. All of that out of the way, let's get back into this. We're talking about brand, we're talking about demand gen, we're talking about life cycle. We're now into the Tofu stage. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out which of these are kind of our most relevant functions here. And again, we're not necessarily thinking explicitly about channels, although I know SEO is a channel. We're thinking more about this Tofu. So first of all, we can say, life cycle doesn't really apply here. I know I said that last time and then changed my mind. But in this case, I believe that is really true. We're not really trying to increase our existing clients' awareness of the problems that they have. So that they already know they have. So we can probably X that out. I would say this is probably not where we want to think about lead gen quite yet. Certainly you could, depending on kind of how you have lead gen structured or how you think about lead gen. I think it's possible to start to sort of start lead gen at the top of the funnel, if you will. But for our purposes, I think it's more going to be it's likely to be lower in the funnel where folks are really sort of interested in engaging with a potential vendor for this. I think I also think that for us specifically, the brand piece of it feels very affinity focused. Again, I think my personal opinion. I know there's a lot of schools of thought on how you set up your marketing team and who owns which metrics, and how all this stuff kind of comes together or whatever. My personal opinion for our specific business is that brand and sort of the goals associated with brand are really focused on affinity, right? So we're just trying to get people to like us and know us. That's really all we're trying to do from a brand perspective. We're not really trying to do much down the funnel. Maybe we kind of bring brand back when we think about this Bofu, since we're trying to sort of do this a little bit of like a category creation play. But I don't see it as particularly relevant here as sort of a brand strategy. So let me let me do this. Oh, my mouse. Sorry, I'm gonna have to pause for a quick second here. My mouse battery is dying and my mouse is being unpredictable. So 1 second. All right, I'm back. Yeah, when the battery on this mouse dies, it starts like drifting and just like doing weird stuff. Anyway, so what I was saying was, yeah, we're probably gonna exclude brand also from this tofu stage. I just don't really see that as being particularly of focus here. And then I'm gonna leave SEO in for now. I think primarily, we're thinking about demand gen, we're thinking about SEO. Again, keeping in mind these are not channels, right? These are functions. So depending on how your org is set up, you may have totally different functions that you're thinking about. Maybe you're not thinking about any of these functions, and you just have one, monolith of that is content marketing or whatever. Uh, but most businesses, right, you've got sort of separate teams. They all kind of need their own supporting content marketing strategy based on their specific goals. So that's kind of why we're going through it like that. We're sort of pretending a little bit that Optimist fits into that, even though we're obviously a much smaller business and we are, the marketing is largely a team of one. So anyway, let's get into it. So once again, just to recap, our problem that we're trying to solve here is that we want to get marketers to diagnose common content marketing problems as a symptom of specific outdated models thinking strategies. So we're trying to sort of connect the dots between, hey, you're feeling this and here's why, right? That's all we're trying to get to. We're not trying to say, and now you need to hire Optimist. We're just trying to say, you've got this problem. Here's why, and then maybe a little bit of information about, here's a new way to approach it or something. But we're not selling at this stage, right? We're just helping people explore and understand their problems. I think SEO is pretty straightforward here. We can maybe jump ahead one step, right? The primary goal from an SEO perspective is rank for keywords related to common content marketing pain points. Actually, I think I'm making sort of the same mistake that I did last time, which is that this is a little bit too much of like a goal and a strategy, right? So thinking about this really quickly. Uh, yeah, so I would say really this is sort of a hybrid between a goal and a strategy. So I think create content helping readers understand, right? So create, let's just say, again, we're trying to be as precise as possible. Create search optimized content helping readers understand and diagnose common content marketing pain points. Boop, boop. And then our goal really is to increase share of voice in search for topics related to content marketing pain points. If I can type. Right. So again, we're not necessarily looking at this as like a specific metric, which obviously you can probably think ahead and say, okay, that's going to translate into a metric like, keywords in position 1 to 3 or like whatever. But for now, right, the overall goal is just like, hey, when people look for information about like a pain point that they're experiencing, we want to show up there and we want to have content that helps them understand their problem and then like sort of figure out how to solve it. I think that's a good way to frame that. Let's think next about demand gen. So again, just for sort of thinking out loud purposes, let's kind of unpack, how these two functions might be different. So when I think about demand gen, again, my thinking is that demand gen is sort of like pressing the spring, so we're sort of trying to kind of prime people to potentially become customers in the future. So in the affinity stage, we're trying to get them to kind of know us, but also know like what we do, right? So we're sort of one step beyond just like kind of traditional brand awareness, and more so like like brand and like product awareness or service awareness in our case. I think when we think about the top of the funnel, uh, I think what we want to do is we want to sort of what we're trying to do here is we're trying to connect our services to these to the specific pain points, right? So basically the idea being that like what we want people to think. So if we think about Affinity, we just want people to think like, oh, Optimist is cool. I like them. And they do, content marketing, you the basics, right? They're aware of us. They kind of know what we do. They know, in general, maybe what kind of services we offer. At the Tofu stage, I think what we want to do is we want people to say like, oh, Optimist helps if you have, if your content strategy is chaotic, or if we're really struggling to figure out a workflow for effectively repurposing our content across different channels or whatever, right? So it's like now it's sort of one level deeper where it's like if I have this specific problem, I go to Optimist, right? I go to Optimist, and they are going to help me with that particular problem. So we want to connect our brand. Sorry, I did like kind of a Donald Trump thing there. I didn't mean to do that. We want to connect our brand uh, to. We want our brand to be seen as the solution to these common pain points, right? Or like a way to solve them, or experts at having solved them, perhaps. I'm sort of working around how to wordsmith that. So what we want to do is we want to connect the Optimist brand, and once again, I think I'm doing this maybe sort of half goal, half strategy thing. Connect the Optimist brand to the idea of solving specific common pain points. Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think that's pretty on the nose there. I don't love how I wordsmithed it, but yeah, again, basically we want people to think, oh, hey, if you've got this problem, Optimist helps with that, right? Optimist can do that thing for you, or can help you overcome that problem, or alleviate that particular pain point. So what is our strategy for doing that? I think really simply it's demonstrate our expertise in a range of specific situations. Again, we're just at the strategy level. We're not getting into tactics yet, so we don't need to define exactly what that means or how that is executed right now. But I think the idea is that we want to demonstrate our team's expertise at handling, solving, fixing a key set of common content marketing challenges. So I think that again, this language is sort of loaded, right? I'm trying to kind of get as precise and as specific as possible, because I think there's a couple things that we can read into here. So first of all, I changed it from demonstrate our expertise to demonstrate our team's expertise. Once again, a huge strength of Optimist is that we've got this big network of people. So that's a big well that we can draw from in terms of thinking about the stories that we can tell, the people in our network who we have connections with, all these things, right? So we can sort of draw from this broader well, rather than just saying like, hey, the Optimist team as an agency did this. We can say, hey, we work with this particular person, and they have expertise in this particular thing. So sort of highlighting individual people's experiences, I think is a part of this strategy. The other thing is that we're handling, solving, and fixing a key set of common content marketing challenges. And so what I think the what I'm trying to communicate there is that we want to sort of draw a boundary around this content, right? So if we're creating content to demonstrate this, I think we want to first define kind of the key places where we fit in, and then we want to sort of have variations on those themes. So rather than just like a random assortment of, hey, we solved a problem where people couldn't rank for a keyword, and we solved a problem where people couldn't uh create content on time, and we solved another problem where there were too many errors in their content or whatever, right? There's like a billion like little pain points and problems that we could solve. But I think first thing that we want to do is we want to articulate like what are the key cornerstone big picture problems that we really want to focus on solving, and then we want all of the content sort of pursuant to the strategy to fit within those key themes. So let's call it, it's both common content marketing challenges, but it's also like thematic content marketing challenges, because again, we want to kind of fit in within a couple key themes. We already know from our research what some of those likely are, right? So we know some of the common challenges are like, hey, I'm so busy making content that I can't think strategically, or I can't plan across my organization. The other problem was hey, I can't get my boss to like buy in on this because I don't have either the time or the bandwidth or the skills or the data to really make a compelling case. That could be sort of a theme that we sort of iterate on. Another thing it could just be like, hey, I just like simply didn't have enough hands to like get content done, and I was looking for help. We could also, kind of come in and talk about some of the specific challenges as people kind of think further down the funnel. So things like, I hired a bunch of freelancers, but then, I had to constantly manage them, and it was, it ended up taking up all my time, just like managing my team of writers or whatever, right? So those are some themes that we might kind of iterate on, and that we could potentially help solve or alleviate at least. So I think that's a good place to leave our strategy there. I think it's specific and clear, but we can interpret that in a bunch of different execution. There's a bunch of different ways to execute that. Let's bolt over here to MOFU. Same kind of thing here. So first of all, I don't think we're going to do anything with brand at this stage. Demand gen. Maybe demand gen. Let me noodle on that. We'll come back to it. Lead gen, yes, for sure. SEO, yes, almost certainly. Life cycle, I think we can eliminate that. Okay, so we got those eliminated. Okay, so let's talk about demand gen. So what's our problem? We're trying to convince our buyers that there's a clear and achievable path. Yeah, I think that fits into demand gen, right? Because I think, at least in our particular case, the goal of demand gen is to first of all sort of establish the awareness of us and what we do, then connect it to common pain points. But then it's ultimately, in order to generate demand, right, you have to sort of present a clear and compelling vision for how someone would implement that, right? Like, it's easy for somebody to say like, yeah, it would be great if I could just like hire Optimist and they would come in and fix all my problems. But if they're not actually convinced of that, then there's not going to be much demand for the actual service, right? It's sort of like, I don't know, like yeah, it'd be great if I could, get my own private jet, and then I wouldn't have to worry about waiting in line at TSA or whatever. But unless you sort of present some kind of compelling evidence that that's like a feasible option, that most people aren't going to like go out and look for a private jet, right? So I think demand gen kind of fits in here. It kind of tapers off towards the middle of the funnel, in my opinion. All right, so we've got demand gen, lead gen, SEO. Let us get into it. Okay, so our primary problem is that we're trying to convince our buyers there's a clear and achievable path to overcoming internal politics, friction, and other barriers. Let's say actually to improve content marketing function and output. basically, fix the machine. There's a way to fix this machine, and you don't have to just live with it forever. And that's not just the way things are, and that kind of thing. So I think from a demand gen perspective, our goal then is to establish clear playbooks for overcoming right. So we're sort of restating the problem, right? But basically, the way that we're trying to solve this, or how we sort of measure our effectiveness at solving this problem in this case, is hmm, again, am I conflating goal and strategy here? Might be conflating goal and strategy here. We'll give this just a second here. To improve content marketing function and output. The nice thing is that while I noodle on this stuff, I can distract myself by tinkering with the cell settings and getting things to actually show up how I want them. Okay, so we want to establish clear playbooks for yeah, I think that's a strategy. I think our goal is slightly different. I mean, I think our goal is to at the highest level, right? Again, we don't have to figure out quite yet how we would measure this, but our goal at the highest level is to increase like sort of I don't know the belief or like yeah. So it's something like that, right? So it's like we want more people to be bought into the idea that these problems can be solved. I think that's where we're at here, right? Is that we're not we don't necessarily need people to at this stage to believe that uh Optimist is the best option, or that they should hire Optimist today, but just believe that this is like a thing that's like worth pursuing, and that like there is a path forward here to fix these problems. Because I think the takeaway that I got from the interviews that we had with these types of buyers was that a lot of people just feel stuck, right? Like they just this is just the way it is. I work at a big company. It's just politics. Things are slow. Like you don't always get things don't work out the way they should or whatever. And so I think people are looking for the competitor here is sort of apathy, I guess, in a way, right? And so I think we want to sort of make people believe, Ted Lasso, if you will, right? I think that's our primary goal here. And then I think this is generally right in terms of the strategy, but I think we can maybe take this one step further, which is that we can like not just establish, but also like demonstrate and establish clear playbooks for overcoming specific problems, i.e., internal politics, other barriers to improve content marketing output. Right. So, and I think this is even take this one step further, right? These are like functional playbooks. So I think it needs to be something that like I can follow this like roadmap, or like here's the 5-step process for turning your internal content machine into something that really works, or five strategies for mitigating internal conflict over content quality, or like whatever it is, right? Like I think that's kind of what we need to get to here. Lead gen. Okay, so the lead gen. So let's start with our goal, right? So what are we actually trying to do here? If we're thinking about lead gen, right? put yourself, you're the head of lead gen at Optimist. What is your goal for the middle of the funnel? I think you want to convert eyeballs into emails, most likely, right? Like that's the most common, most basic goal. Yeah, let's just start with that. We can always iterate on that. Convert eyeballs into, let's just say, contacts. That gives us some flexibility. Also to think about, some of these other metrics. We might convert those contacts in a slightly different way. Maybe there's not all email, TBD. By the way, that's probably a good point to mention, which is that we're working through this process in this particular order where we're focused on the problems and the goal and the strategy right now, and then channels, metrics, and tactics. You could potentially sort of invert this or combine some of these, right? Obviously, your goal and your strategy may in some ways be dependent upon your channel. But I like to do it this way. But there could be a world where you say, hey, I'm going to start with the channels that make the most sense here. And ultimately, really, these things are sort of circular. So I think no matter where you start in this process, the key thing is just that as you sort of work through each of these inputs or each of these fields, that you're sort of cross referencing them. Like, does this make sense? Like, does this channel make sense based on this goal? Or if I've set this goal, then which channels are going to make the most sense, right? So you've got, it's sort of a circular logic there. So it doesn't really matter which one you start with, but I think my personal opinion, I like kind of setting the high level first, thinking as sort of agnostically as I possibly can, and then using that to kind of draw a barrier around the more specific channels, metrics, etc. Don't start with tactics for reasons we've already discussed. But tactics are, tactics are tactical, right? You really should have all this other stuff figured out before you start thinking about any actual execution of the idea. Okay, so we're going to convert eyeballs into contacts. So how are we going to do that? So we need to convince our buyers that there's a clear, achievable path to overcoming internal politics, friction, and other barriers to improve content marketing function and output. The most basic strategy here, right, is sort of the time tested, right? We could require an email to get our content or whatever, right? Like so that's a little bit of a tactic, but it's we could also think about it at the strategy level, like it can manifest in many different ways tactically. So yeah, one strategy could just be use gated content to convert people. But let's try to get more creative than that. What are some other ways that we can? What are some other strategies that we can use to convert people who know and hopefully like us and connect us with specific ideas about common content marketing challenges, and now we want them to sort of raise their hand and say like, yeah, I'm in this club too, or like this is a problem that I have, or at least I'm interested in continuing to get content about those problems that you're talking about. So one thing that we could do here, again, in lieu of a standard like sort of gated content strategy, is that we could offer some kind of personal consultation or something, right? Again, I'm sort of conflating tactics here, but the point being is that we could the strategy could be to basically get people to explicitly opt in for help, right? So not just opting into an email list or opting into getting content, but actually opting in and saying like, hey, I have this problem, can you help me, even if it's for free, right? So sort of opting in for free help could kind of be a strategy. um might be interesting. let's think about some other ways that we could approach this. We could build. We could have people join like a community, right? So we could like kind of create like a safe space for people where we say like, hey, look, you're having this problem. You got 6 other people that also have that same problem. Let's bring those people together. We'll talk through it together and kind of figure out what that might look like. That's actually a really compelling idea. Obviously, I run a community. It's a free community. There is a paid tier, but the idea of sort of like small peer cohorts of some sort, right? Where it's like, hey, we're gonna bring these 6 people together, and we're just gonna like work through some of your content marketing challenges, get ideas from each other, kind of riff on what might work. That feels compelling to me. Hmm. Let me check chat. See if y'all are chiming in by any chance. Anybody have any thoughts on that or any additional ideas? I think I'm gonna go that route, but I want to make it a little bit more broad so that we can kind of execute that in several different ways. Um, yeah, I'm gonna again I'm leaving this one a little less precise probably than some of the other ones. But the idea being it's like I'm saying safe space. I don't mean that in any like weird political undertones or anything. I just mean that like we're creating kind of some kind of a private or like semi-private place for people to like sort of transparently share their frustrations or their whatever, to share and connect about comment about mutual content marketing frustrations. And then the way that this sort of ladders up into the strategy is that there's some sort of we're sort of the facilitating this in some way, and so these people become contacts of ours. And also, by the way, now we have sort of an inside track on like what those problems are and how we might be able to help them solve them. Obviously, not every single person who opts into this is necessarily going to be a true lead, but that's how lead gen works, right? You sort of capture people at a point where they're demonstrating a need, and then from there you try to have a discussion or a dialogue to further qualify if they are potentially customers. Let's flip back here real quick. So we want to increase the share of voice for search topics. So, I mean, I think our goal here from an SEO perspective is pretty similar. Share of voice for topics related to content marketing pain points. In this case, I would say it's like content marketing. Hmm, maybe like solutions. I think that's broad enough. I mean, it's broad yet specific enough. Maybe that's what I should say. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of keywords that fit into MOFU. I mean, we could. I'm not going to spend too long on that, but I mean, we could definitely, it could be everything from. Yeah, I mean, it could be everything from getting internal buy-in for content to all kinds of different topics. Um, I think my thinking is a little bit evolving here in terms of SEO for our own purposes. I think there's value there, but I think we'll definitely want to, before we get too far into this, or I guess this will probably be a Friday activity, is we'll want to explore what those keywords look like, see, kind of what is that juice worth the squeeze, which is might be interesting to hear from someone like me. I spent most of my career spending, splitting time basically between content marketing broadly and SEO specifically, and and yeah, even I'm sort of on the fence of like, how much time and money should we put into SEO, which certainly does not make me alone. I think as I've shared on LinkedIn over the last couple weeks or the last week or so, uh, I've been hearing that a lot. A lot of people are sort of second guessing, how much money, how much time, how much energy and effort do we want to put into SEO given all the changes that are happening, all the competition that comes with AI, all the downward pressure on sort of how much time and money we can spend on actually creating content for this channel. We're feeling it too. So, nevertheless, I think for now we'll say that's a viable strategy. Our strategy here again, it's probably basically just the same thing here. I mean, that's the good and the bad of SEO, right? Is that there's really only one strategy when it comes to SEO. I mean, that's not entirely true, but for most businesses, there's sort of one clear strategy that's most likely to be successful, which is creating search optimized content, helping readers. So what we're trying to do here, we're not understanding and diagnosing common problems. We are evaluating or like considering helping readers consider and evaluate potential solutions or paths forward. Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame that. All right, cool. So what do we got? We got about 40 minutes left, which should be hopefully just enough time. If we pop over here, how did I? Oh, I was just like, okay, never mind. Sorry, I thought I messed up my formatting. Okay, so let's jump over to Bofu. We're going to do kind of the same thing that we did before. First of all, we're going to clear out some of these that we know are not going to be relevant at this particular stage. We talked about this. I think demand gen might come back here. I do. I think demand gen comes back here, which again I think might be weird. It probably isn't relevant for other companies, but I think when you have sort of a category, type of strategy, which I'm not really saying we're trying to create a category necessarily, but like when you're trying to kind of introduce some new idea to people, I think demand gen does kind of dip into that like bottom of the funnel because you have to also like establish demand for just like that thing, right? So like again, if I'm let's say HR software does not exist and I'm the first ever HR software, not only do I need to create awareness and demand for my product, but I also want to sort of create demand and awareness for this category of products that should hopefully kind of help raise the ship for me. So I think kind of the same thing here, right? I think we want to sort of build awareness for sort of this bottom of the funnel kind of thing, which is like a sort of a new category of vendor or of partner, which is Optimist, this kind of hybrid model. Lead gen, obviously SEO, we can kind of copy and paste. Life cycle also probably plays a role here. If we want to think, kind of broadly about like nurturing and those types of things. So let's pop that up here real quick. We'll grab SEO since this is mostly a copy and paste, should be pretty straightforward. We want to increase the share of voice topics related to let's see, content marketing, products, services, basically, right? So alternatives to whatever best content marketing agencies for X, Y, and Z, whatever those types of queries are going to be most relevant here. So we want to help consider and evaluate potential solutions or path forward. Consider, evaluate, and decide between specific content marketing products and services. Yeah. Okay, that one's done. Let's talk about demand gen. So we just talked about this a little bit. I think our goal is to create awareness for fourth path. Yeah. So I think that's what we want to do, right? So, you could imagine, we got sort of if you kind of think about it, put on your campaign hat for a second, right? We're sort of creating awareness for, I don't know, basketball sneakers. And then we're gonna try to sell them Nike, right? But first of all, we gotta talk about why you need basketball sneakers in the first place. Um, so what's our strategy for doing that? That's an interesting one. Um, I think it's to juxtapose Optimist's hybrid model with common issues. I think that's the right approach, right? So, sort of focusing on the pain points related to the solution itself, rather than like the big pain point that you're trying to solve. Um, mhm, mhm. I think that's right. Yeah, because we're trying to kind of differentiate. So another way of thinking about that might be, if you kind of apply that similar logic to like a software, for instance, right? You want to talk about like, oh, hey, like our software integrates much easier with your existing systems. The other software, it sucks, and the problem that you are going to have is that you're not going to be able to, you know, this screen is not going to properly translate into the screen on the software that you're used to, or like whatever it is, right? So there's sort of these yeah, these very specific challenges with the actual product or the actual implementation, that, by the way, you can avoid those by choosing us instead. I think that's kind of the way that we want to frame that. Let's talk about lead gen. So before we talked about, the goal was basically just converting contacts. I think in this case we want to sort of convert, let's say, convert contacts into, we don't really have like MQLs or SQLs or whatever, but for the sake of using, kind of common language, let's just say, SQLs, or actual leads, let's say. Um, and real quick, before we articulate the strategy for that, it's probably worth jumping ahead, because obviously lead gen and lifecycle have a little bit of overlap in this stage, right? So if we're thinking about, life cycle being kind of a nurturing kind of function, the goal of that nurturing is often to, convert your contacts into SQLs. In this case, I think we can differentiate these two things by saying that actually the goal of our life cycle is sort of the opposite, right? So it's like, if people aren't ready to convert into an SQL, but they are a contact, so they're just stuck in this like, middle of the funnel stage, and they're not quite ready to move into the bottom of the funnel, meaning like, hey, I really would love to buy this thing, but either I don't have budget or whatever. We want to keep them engaged, right? So keep, again, I'll use sort of common language. We want to keep MQLs engaged, or we could actually probably go one step further, which is maybe like, can we do more than just like sort of keep them warm? Could we think about ways to kind of help them move into that stage? So yeah, so sort of coming back to the idea of like selling internally, being like an internal champion, having sort of compelling evidence or data or whatever, to say, here's how to. um, mhm, mhm. Thinking. So if lead gen's job is to convert the contacts into SQLs, then Lifecycle's job is to give, and again, this is the goal, so we don't want to get too much into the strategy or the tactics quite yet. How would we, sort of measure that in an umbrella way? We would measure that by um, increasing the conversion. Yeah, and again, I'm getting a little bit into specific metrics there, but basically, what we're trying to get convert more MQLs into SQLs. There you go. There, that's more general. And then again, we can obviously kind of define that as a metric, in terms of conversion rate. But for now, the main thing is like we're just trying to sort of accelerate the pipeline, if you will, with lifecycle at this stage. Lead gen, lifecycle. Okay, so what is our strategy here? So our strategy for converting contacts into SQLs, we need to establish Optimist as a fourth path for handling content marketing and overcoming anxiety, or overcoming existing problems, bottlenecks, etc. What's a guiding principle that gets us there? Today is a mentally taxing day. A lot of the other ones, we're sort of copy and pasting. We're kind of analyzing existing text. As all my content and writing folks know, anytime you sort of have to conjure something from nothing, makes it a little bit more difficult, more mentally draining. So we're trying to convert our context into SQLs to establish this fourth path. So let's think about how that actually happens in practice. So, well, first of all, maybe it's worthwhile to kind of rewind really fast. So we talked about lead gen in this stage. We are potentially kind of creating these like pools. This is what we would consider to be kind of like an MQL, right? Is that like somebody who has sort of opted into one of these like communities or cohorts or something? Again, this is just like a theory right now, so we haven't figured out exactly what that looks like yet. But the idea being that like they sort of raise their hands of like, yeah, we've got this problem. Like, can we get some more information about that, about what these options might look like? But they haven't demonstrated like, oh yeah, we're ready to like hire an agency, right? And so really, when we think about converting contacts into SQLs, or I guess, yeah, real quick before let's be specific about this, right? What we're really trying to do is get those people to then say, okay, hey, you've given me enough context, enough value, enough whatever that like now I'm actually interested in like engaging with Optimist as like a potential partner or a potential service that's going to help me. So the strategy for doing that is to I think what we want to happen here is we want people to self-qualify. That's the strategy. Now, again, that can take a bunch of different there's a bunch of different tactical forms that can take, trying not to get too far down the rabbit hole. But I think the strategy here is to help content leaders self qualify as a good fit for the fourth path option that Optimist presents. And so the reason why I'm articulating it this way really comes from the conversations that we have with customers or the ICP, right? So almost everyone that I've talked to expressed the exact same frustrations and apprehensions about potentially working with an agency, potentially working with freelancers. Even if they had already chosen one of those paths, There was never anybody who's like, I work with freelancers and it's great, or I hired an agency and it's perfect. They always had the same general, like, sort of, again, either frustrations with a current set of freelancers or agency that they're working with, or apprehensions that were stopping them from working with an agency or hiring freelancers. And so I think that the best way to do this is, like, rather than me saying, coming to you and saying, like, agencies suck and freelancers suck, you should hire us instead, right? Which, by the way, sorry if you're an agency or freelancer watching this, no offense, I'm sorry, I don't hate you. It's just marketing. Um, but the point being is that they likely already recognize those pain points. And so all we have to do is sort of hold up the mirror and say, hey, do you see yourself in the mirror? If yes, then check, here's another option. Reach out to us. So I think that's the way to approach it. And then again, tomorrow we'll dig into the tactics here. That could be anything from, maybe it's like a quiz or, whatever. There's a bunch of different ways that we can execute that. So I like this as a strategy because it's not, again, it's not like hard sales, where I'm trying to, like, sell you on this vision. I'm just sort of letting you kind of figure it out and see yourself in that, in this type of solution. So then let's talk about converting more MQLs into SQLs. So again, returning to this frame of reference here, we're thinking about content for the lifecycle team. That's me. To help them convert more MQLs into SQLs. Yeah, we want to provide compelling evidence so we want to provide compelling evidence to help content leaders campaign internally for investment in a content marketing solution, right? So sort of inherent in this strategy is an assumption, which is that first of all, let's get more specific than that, right? So we want to provide this evidence, this compelling evidence, for investing in content marketing broadly, yes, but more specifically, sort of baked into that execution, I think, needs to be that, we're not just investing in hiring an agency or hiring a freelancer, but we're investing in this other option, which is a hybrid, sort of solution that, sort of alleviates all of the internal objections that might crop up. So that's kind of the idea here. Again, what I was saying before is that, I'm inherent in this strategy is sort of a specific problem that we're trying to solve, which is to say that, like, the assumption is that the main barrier at this stage, from people who are MQLs but are not, sort of fully raising their hand and saying, like, yes, I'm interested in hiring you, is, that there's some sort of internal barrier or conflict, right? So, like, if I had it my way, I'd hire Optimist tomorrow, but, my boss won't give me the budget, or, I can't get people to buy in on this idea or whatever. And so that's sort of the problem that we're trying to solve here. And by the way, I'm sort of bringing this full circle because we talked about this when we framed the problem a little bit, but just to reiterate, we identified one problem for sort of the entire stage of the funnel, which is sort of true. But if you really wanted to get, into the weeds and really think deeply about these, right, there are a bunch of problems that you could be solving here related to converting more MQLs into SQLs. Yeah. So the point being is that, you could kind of take this this whole process one level deeper by defining a specific problem for each stage in the funnel, each function, possibly even each channel, right? So, maybe your problem on LinkedIn is the algorithm, but your problem in the email newsletter is obviously not the algorithm. Maybe it's the spam detection or whatever, right? So, there are different problems that you're trying to overcome. You could get much more granular than this, and your sort of The good news is that your strategy gets way more precise. The bad news is that it also becomes sort of exponentially more complex. And you're trying to solve multiple problems for each channel, and then multiple functions, and then across different buyer's journey. This spreadsheet would be 8 dimensions instead of 4. So yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind, is that you could definitely go further down that rabbit hole, but they are sort of diminishing returns at some point. Let's see. We do have retention left, so let's go to retention really quick. I think we can pretty confidently say these are out. I don't think we're doing anything with SEO related to retention. Um, we are primarily. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Been doing it this way. Let's see here. So yeah, we're primarily focused, I would say, on life cycle, of course. And I think we talked a little bit about this before, so we can maybe rehash some of the things that we already covered there. Let me just get all my things aligned here once again. And then let's grab our life cycle. Let's bring it up to the top here. Yeah, so brand and life cycle, interestingly, right? I mean, I guess this is not an original thought. I don't think, right? The funnel kind of loops back in on itself a little bit, right? So if we think about sort of the very top of the funnel in this affinity, we talked already about how, hey, there is actually a role for this as it relates to our existing clients. The kind of same thing for retention, right? It's like the overlap here between affinity and retention, as it relates to again, our existing clients and like sort of the life cycle marketing, for instance, I think is pretty similar. We could maybe think about this in a slightly different way, to come up with a different strategy that would more directly support retention. Here, just as a recap or a reminder, right? We talked about getting our existing clients to actually consume our content, as a way to kind of continue to improve their like trust and affinity for our brand. Here, we could get a little bit more specific, as it relates to like just extending the engagement, sort of increasing the lifetime value. Uh, the affinity thing, I think, is sort of a passive way to do that. I think that's sort of the implication, is that if you build more trust and more affinity with your clients, it will likely lead to longer outcomes, but that may not always be the case. So it might be worth it, at least, motivating our client contacts to sell the value of the work internally to other stakeholders and executives. I think our goal here is to mm, gen- I think our goal here is to generate more buy-in for the work that's actively being produced. And actually, maybe buy-in is the wrong word. Enthusiasm. Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. And again, we're not talking specific metrics or how exactly we measure that right now. The idea just being that, like, hey, the ideal outcome here is that, like, everyone on the team is super amped about the work that we're doing with this company or this client, which is likely to lead to a longer lasting engagement, right? Whereas, and also kind of solves for this problem that we're trying to solve, which is that we need like our contact to sort of sell that internally, right? Like if the CEO doesn't see the work that we do, or they don't, or they hate it, then it's that sort of sentiment is likely to trickle down and impact us. So we want to motivate our client contacts to sell the value of our work by and get them to generate more internal enthusiasm for the work that's being produced. How do we do that? How do we do that? Obviously, one way is focusing on metrics. Hey, we reporting basically, right? So sort of reporting up to our client contact, and then sort of giving them something to hopefully report even further up. That's one way to do it. One of the challenges with that, it's not always clear cut depending on the client and their strategy, right? One of the things that we've recognized here in this research and this process is that a lot of times we're creating content for some difficult to quantify goal or campaign or internal team, where there isn't like a clear metric that we can just say like, hey, look, the number went up, that's great. um, one way that we could do this, or one strategy, again, I'm trying not to get tactical yet, but one strategy is that we sort of highlight or emphasize sort of the exceptional nature of the content, right? So in some way, and again, we'll talk about tactics, of course, tomorrow. So we don't have to come up with the exact tactics right now, but in some way, we say, hey, look at this cool thing we made, and then look at what everyone else is making. It's not nearly as good. Like we stand out in some particular way, right? Whether it's the writing is better or the design is cooler or whatever it is, right? There's some sort of demonstrable contrast that we're presenting to say, oh, aren't we doing a great job? Our contacts should be excited about that. They should share that internally and say, hey, look, we're kicking our competitors' ass at content. Look at how much better our content is than theirs. I think that's a good strategy, right? So highlight or emphasize the exceptional nature. I'm just gonna say nature because that's more broad, right? Most likely it relates to the quality of the content itself, but TBD. Highlight or emphasize the exceptional nature of the output versus peers, competitors, others in the industry. And once again, just to cheat a little bit and kind of preview, right? That could take a lot of different forms from a tactics perspective. One tactic could be like submit work for awards or something, right? Like that's not really content per se, but like that's a tactic that sort of rolls up into this content strategy. Let's talk about brand as our final box here. So what is our goal with brand as it relates to retention? Is like motivate client contacts to sell the value of internal work. I think like we want our clients to be really proud of the fact that they work with us. I think that's it. I think that's the goal. Clients, yeah. How do we do that? What's the strategy? My first thought is that it sort of relates to the relative social proof of our other clients, right? So if I'm going to be proud about working with an agency, the primary reason that I'm going to be proud of working with that agency is because they work with other brands that other people envy, right? I think that like there's sort of like a transferable social proof kind of element there, which is sort of interesting. Um, Obviously, the work that we produce together is valuable, but that in my mind at least, and feel free to chime in if you're still tuning into the stream and have thoughts on this, but in my mind at least, the work product itself is almost separate from any pride in sort of the process by which it was created, if you will, right? So like I'm really proud of like the content that I made, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm like really proud of like the people I worked with to make it. I mean, I guess you likely would be, but I don't think it quite holds the same resonance as like, hey, like we work with this brand and they work with these other really cool brands, and so therefore, we're sort of in the cool club by sort of virtue of the again the sort of transference of social proof, if you will. Uh, hmm. I think the strategy here is sort of a follow on from that, which is we want to sort of establish make clients really proud of the fact that they work with us. We want to like establish the quality and or exclusivity of our clients, right? So we want to what we're sort of circling around here is sort of like a it's sort of like the you know the playbook for like luxury goods or whatever, right? It's like if everyone has it, then it's just a commodity. So like, but if only the rich and the famous have it, then it's something that everybody wants. So I think the key there is that yeah, we want to sort of somehow, and again, obviously we're not getting to tactics today, so we'll wrap that up shortly. But the point is that we want to make these clients like really sort of proud of us, are proud of working with us, and by doing that, or in order to do that, we want to kind of confer like a special status somehow upon the businesses that we work with. They're an Optimist client. Oh wow, like that means something. Like that's a big deal. I think that's kind of the way to do it. Okay. Well, I'm excited to dig into that tomorrow because I think there's a lot of interesting things that we can sort of iterate on in terms of the tactics and the execution of that. But yeah, I think making clients really proud of us, generating more internal enthusiasm. This has been a really productive and fruitful day. I mean, I think we've laid a ton of groundwork here for our strategy. We've got a really clear picture of these different goals and these different how we're going to create content to serve different functions all across the buyer's journey. Again, this is perhaps my favorite day. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Maybe tomorrow will be my favorite day where we're going to start brainstorming. Tomorrow, we're going to, kind of map all this stuff back to the specific channels that we've already identified. We're going to figure out some specific metrics that we want to measure. And then we're going to get to, really the really fun part, which is the tactics. So really coming up with sort of specific ideas or visions for, how does this idea actually come to life in the real world? So yeah, definitely join me tomorrow, where we get into that stuff, and go through everything. As a wrap up here, let me just flip back to our boom. Yeah. So I can safely cross off our full list here. So as I said, tomorrow we're going to map out specific channels for each function of the stage. We're going to define metrics based on the goals that we set, and then we're going to develop those individual tactics. So it's going to be mostly just kind of like raw brainstorming, looking at the research that we did, coming up with ideas that kind of support the through line. And it's definitely going to be a situation where, there's no wrong answers. Let's develop a bunch of ideas about the tactics and then we can kind of refine them later. So yeah, it should be a really good time. Love to see you there. Once again, thanks for your support. Thanks for following along this week on the live strategy project here. I hope it's been helpful and valuable to you to kind of watch this process in real time. If you do have any questions or want to dig into anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'm super accessible. LinkedIn, Tofu, wherever you want to get a hold of me. Also, if you want to get a copy of this content strategy canvas, by the way, let me just pull it up one more time so that you can see what you're getting. This whole content strategy canvas, laid out with all of these fields and everything kind of mapped out for you. If you want to get a hold of this, look for my recap post, which I'll post on LinkedIn, pretty much immediately after this live stream. All you have to do is drop a comment on it and you'll be able to get a copy of that, this template as well. Awesome. Well, once again, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining. Hope it's been helpful, and see you soon. Cheers, y'all.